All right, well, we can actually go ahead and put this first headline from CNN up on the screen. It just says, Israel reverses on seizure of AP camera feed after intense backlash. And, Ryan, that pretty much sums it up, just reading from the lead of the CNN story. In a sharp reversal, Israel said Tuesday it would return camera and broadcast equipment it had seized from the Associated Press in the southern Israeli city of, how do I say that? Sderot on Tuesday after the action prompted swift backlash from U.S. officials and press groups. Swift backlash might be an understatement. What did you make, actually, of how the U.S. responded to this?
And they seized, their pretext for seizing the AP camera was that Al Jazeera, which they have banned from operating in the occupied territories or in Israel, has a subscription to the AP, as do most news organizations, and therefore that the AP is just the same as Al Jazeera and needs to be, rolled up just like them.
Yeah.
The White House, expressed its concern, and it was a rare case of the White House expressing concern. Love Kenny Clips every time he makes fun of the White House for expressing
Ken Klippenstein,
concern.
Substacker Ken Klippenstein. Right. You can subscribe, actually, to Ken's.
KenKlippenstein.com.
There you go.
So if you're just listening on the podcast, it's a Barack Ravid tweet that says, breaking, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters that the Biden administration is concerned by reports that the Israeli government confiscated equipment of the AP. She said journalists need to have the right and the ability to do their job, which Ken adds, breaking, the White House is concerned. But not only was the White House concerned, reporters throughout Israel were concerned and across the world were concerned. And so it was a rare moment where Israel basically acknowledged an overstep.
Yeah.
Like, okay, our bad. And so they returned the equipment, backing down a tiny bit.
I was just going to read, actually, the statement from the Israeli communications minister, who said he has ordered the equipment be returned to the AP news agency because the Israeli Ministry of Defense requested to re-examine the matter of broadcasts from sensitive locations and their effect on the risk of our forces. So what Israel is saying there, obviously the implicit reason for seizing the AP cameras is that this is putting, your journalism is putting the military at risk. And actually, there absolutely are times when that's a real concern that journalists have to grapple with and that governments have to grapple with. But the rapid reversal here and saying from the statement just, well, we've decided to reconsider the entire matter of our approach.
Right, because it felt like it was a bit of a kind of fabricated rationale, like post hoc, once they were coming under fire for cracking down on the AP because it has a relationship with Al Jazeera, that's what the AP does. They sell their feed.
Their wire service.
Their wire service. Like they're an association of the press.
Yes.
And Al Jazeera is part of the press, whether Israel likes it or not. They have already banned basically any Western journalists from getting into Gaza. What they would be claiming now is that getting anywhere near Gaza is also something that they're not going to allow. But it seems they did at least backtrack on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quickly.
Yeah, and speaking of press freedoms, we can talk about this real quickly. At least 7 Palestinians were killed in a raid in Jenin recently. Jenin has been the subject of intense IDF raids for years now, and it was actually where Shireen Abu Akleh was killed.
I was just going to say that, yes.
But obviously before October 7th. Palestinian media is saying that a 50-year-old surgeon named Dr. Usaid Jabarin was killed on his way to work, as was a child who was riding his bicycle. There are a lot of videos that you can find on social media of just absolutely indiscriminate shooting from IDF forces. IDF says it is going to investigate itself to see if any of this indiscriminate shooting did kill people that they allegedly did not intend to kill. Mm-hmm. We'll see.
Now, on the other side of this, talking about humanitarian concerns and potential famine and food shortages, let's put this element from Haaretz up on the screen that begins with the quote, "Spill it onto the road." And the headline proceeds to say how right-wing Israeli activists are organizing to block aid trucks to Gaza. This is an investigation, an overview of some of the organized efforts to block some of these aid trucks. The next element here is from The Guardian. Their reporting suggests that Israeli soldiers and police are tipping off some of those groups. So again, like the organization here, I think is important. The coordination, Ryan, I think is important because some people may say, well, this is just sort of organic gatherings of, people who are, still raging from the enraging, happenings on October 7th, the tragedy, the killings, the slaughter on October 7th. But I think it's important here also to mention that this is an organized effort when it comes to the aid trucks. Absolutely. And that's what The Guardian reporting suggests, and I think kind of confirms from the perspective of how Israeli law enforcement's handling it.
Yeah, all the way to the top. We can put up this next element from Itamar Ben-Gvir, National Security Minister, who was like raging. He's, quote, "Why are my cops here?" Because you've seen what you've seen, and basically what he's saying is, why on earth are Israeli authorities defending the aid convoys that are going to Gaza from these protesters? Like he wants to support the protesters rather than the aid convoys. What you're seeing here is the same thing that happened with the AP camera. The world opinion is just so overwhelmingly against this idea that you're going to allow and organize with right-wing protesters to block flour and other aid from getting into Gaza, that there has been some suppression of that internally. One of the lead organizations, this happened last week, one of the lead organizations that was organizing these protests announced that it was going to pause them. Said it's not a good time to do these. Now, there's still some, obviously, people who are still continuing to do it, but the kind of viral videos of them smashing flour bags and destroying things right after Biden just had a temper tantrum in the United States about how breaking a window at Columbia is property violence and like the greatest crime that you could possibly imagine. You got all this property violence against the aid going in, and this also coming at the same time as the ICC arrest warrants being applied for, and the ICJ moving forward with its accusation against the state of Israel that it is deliberately starving this population. That's
absolutely critical, by the way. The Guardian report that we had up on the screen about whether Israeli police are tipping off some of the activists who are blocking the aid trucks, not merely protesting the aid trucks, but actively trying to block the aid trucks. That goes to whether this is a deliberate effort on behalf of the government itself, as opposed to, again, just some protests that they're working to contain, just some activists that they're working to contain. That's critical to the question that the ICC is considering. And I think, Ryan, that's probably why we're seeing more about it in the media right now, because this has become a football in both sides of that battle. And I mean, it's a tough thing for them to get around when you have Ben-Gvir, to the point that you just made, the quotes from Ben-Gvir, you have the statements and the way that he's approached all of this, and other people as well. I think that's why this is becoming it's obvious. You don't even need my speculation. That's why this is becoming such a major conversation about how this is actually happening, what organization is behind this, what coordination is behind this. That's critical to the ICC proving that there's something deliberate happening on behalf of the Israeli government.
And since glimmers of hope are so few in this, we should mention that a very cool organization in Israel called Standing Together, which is it's kind of a coexistence organization with both Jewish Israelis and Palestinians as members of it, as kind of co-leaders of it. They've been now going down to these protests and standing together against the protesters and kind of defending the trucks that are trying to get in. Most of what they do nowadays is basically criminal under Israeli law, and so we'll see what the reaction is to this organization being willing to stand up for these trucks. Meanwhile, from what I'm hearing from people on the ground at the crossings, the number of trucks getting through yesterday and the day before is dangerously close to approaching like single digits. Like Israel had been bragging about, say, 200, getting in a day, where the UN was saying, no, you need 1,000 or more on a daily basis. getting down into double digits or single digits is bringing it to a place where distribution is stopping. Like the UN has announced, like a lot of aid distribution has just stopped.
Yeah.
The cupboards are bare, running out of fuel. Because fuel is obviously essential for distributing the aid. You don't have fuel, you can't distribute the aid. And so all of this is happening in the context of real things on the ground. And the real things on the ground are aid getting choked to a point of almost zero. The Rafah is still not open. You've got, Egypt, refusing on its side to cooperate with Israel. Israel refusing to allow anything but fuel, but Egypt not letting anything in, and then everything having to go through Kerem Shalom. But just an absolute trickle getting through there.
And they're not wrong that the difficulties of having a de facto Hamas government in these places makes it difficult in a war zone. That's not going to be a non-issue anywhere that there's aid being distributed in a war zone. But to say that we are providing adequate aid is different than saying no, we're just outright starving everyone. And Israel is saying despite all of these challenges, there is no starvation, there is no famine. We are providing adequate aid. They're not a party to the ICC. Obviously, this is that's another issue entirely. But they are saying one thing, and that's
the reality on the ground is different.
And I think everyone understands that there are real challenges, even in the best case scenario. There are real challenges here, but the difference between what's being publicly said and what's actually happening, I think, is what's being sussed out in some of this reporting. Speaking of Rafah, Ryan, we can put this next element up on the screen. This is a tweet from Just Foreign Policy. This is it was, I don't want to say buried, but it was in a David Ignatius report in the Washington Post. Biden no longer opposing Israel's plan for final assault on Rafah, is how Just Foreign Policy phrased it. But it was in this David Ignatius column. He writes, Israeli leaders have reached a consensus about a final assault on Hamas's 4 remaining battalions in Rafah. Instead of the heavy attack with 2 divisions that Israel contemplated several weeks ago, government and military leaders foresee a more limited assault that U.S. officials think will result in fewer civilian casualties. And for that reason, Biden won't oppose. Sort of a buried lead, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Biden won't oppose this, quote, limited assault, even though he was opposed to the Rafah incursion. Here and you get this very friendly to the national security state, David Ignatius, a report saying, well, Biden won't oppose a, quote, more limited assault. The White House would never put out a statement to that effect, but I guess they will leak it through David Ignatius?
Right. Ignatius D is the kind of the CIA.
Yes.
Like that's the go-to source for them.
He's briefed the CIA, in fact.
Yeah, and so for anybody who believed the Biden insistence over the months that Rafah was a red line, it just makes a mockery of that naivete, because here he's saying, oh, you know what, actually, the way you're doing it, that's okay. There's 4 battalions. We thought it was going to be much worse than this, but this seems fine. Meanwhile, the reports from the ground are of an absolute bloodbath in Rafah, plus 800,000 people so far migrating elsewhere in Gaza to places that have no sanitation, no hygiene, no water. The entire condition was Israel had to have some plan where they were going to move people. They didn't come up with a plan. Their plan basically was, we're going to make it so violent when we invade that they're either going to die or they're going to just find somewhere to run to elsewhere. And Biden responds to that by saying, okay, this is fine.
So let's put this next element up. This is from Prem Thacker, who's responding to Antony Blinken's testimony in front of Congress yesterday. So he said he's happy to work with Congress on, quote, an appropriate response, this is Blinken, to the ICC prosecutor issuing warrants to Israeli leaders. Now, Prem then, quote, tweeted that original tweet and said, minutes later, Senators Graham, Cardin, Blumenthal, Shaheen, Fetterman, Risch, Britt, Thune, so that's a bipartisan coalition, declared they'll work in, quote, a bipartisan manner to strenuously object to the ICC's actions against our ally Israel and take appropriate steps to help Israel and protect Americans from ICC action. Ryan, that just brings us back to basically why these conversations and the reporting from The Guardian that we mentioned earlier is critical because the U.S. now has this huge issue on its hands when it comes to the ICC, when it comes to the U.S.'s funding of what's happening in Israel, the U.S.'s sort of sanctioning of what the Israeli military does to the extent that that happens. The central question of deliberate aid blocking, deliberate activism against aid blocking, that question becomes key in even what the U.S. Response to all of this is, how far the U.S. goes to defend what's happening. This bipartisan coalition obviously was eager to jump on that.
And one thing I forgot to put in the rundown, but I think it's worth mentioning before we move on to what we got. Bill Maher.
We got Bill Maher coming right up.
Don't worry, we'll get to Bill
Maher.
Coming in hot. On Monday at the State Department, I asked about this deal that Hamas had agreed to, and asked the State Department, what role did Director William Burns play, CIA Director William Burns play in this role? Because there's reporting that he signed off on the thing. And Miller's answer was kind of interesting because it was like, there's been some good reporting on this, some not, but he didn't just say, no, Burns did not sign off on that.
Yeah.
There was a much kind of a more open-ended answer. And then there was this fascinating report in CNN yesterday, which I'm not sure if you saw it, that said that an Egyptian intelligence officer, so take all this with a grain of salt, but it's interesting that it's being reported. And it might also be true.
Yeah.
An Egyptian intelligence officer tweaked the proposal after the U.S., Qatar, Egypt, Israel had all agreed to it before sending it to Hamas.
Last week.
And then Hamas agreed to the one that they had been delivered. So what we were being told was that Hamas changed it.
Yes.
And then agreed to it, and it was trying to get one over on everybody, and fake agreeing to a ceasefire. What we're now being told is that they agreed to the exact deal that they were offered, and were told that the Israelis were supportive of, because the tweaks were minor.
By an Egyptian intermediary.
Intelligence source. So, and one of the quotes in the article, Hamas was telling their people, we will have a deal in place tomorrow. In other words, that this was not a gimmick. Like Hamas was not just playing PR and expecting a Rafah invasion. Like they thought that they had agreed to the deal. They even named the intern who made the changes.
Oh my gosh.
And he's not an intern, but this is how CNN reports it. The three sources familiar with the matter told CNN that a senior Egyptian intelligence official named Ahmed Abdel Khalek was responsible for making the changes. Abdel Khalek is a senior deputy to the Egyptian intelligence chief, Abbas Kamel, who has been Burns' counterpart in leading Egypt's mediation in the ceasefire talks. One source familiar with the negotiations said Khalek told the Israelis one thing and Hamas another. More of Hamas's demands were inserted into the original framework that Israel had tacitly agreed to in order to secure Hamas's approval, the source said. So one source is saying that Israel actually did agree to most of this. But the other mediators were not informed, nor critically were the Israelis. So giant mess, and it's like they're trying to say it was this guy Khalek who tweaked the thing at the last minute, which, like I said, there's something happened here.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's leaking out to CNN here, it suggests that there's some cleanup going on the part of the West, and that it does appear from this reporting that Hamas was earnestly agreeing to a peace deal.
Pretty interesting that's in CNN.
Yeah. Jeremy Diamond's one of the reporters there. He's a very, very strong reporter. He's done some really good work out of there. So, because CNN contains multitudes, to put it generously.
That's one way to put it.
And Jeremy Diamond's done a lot of very good reporting.
So, Ryan, I just wanted to say before we move on, that was maybe, we were approaching peak Ryan Grimm when you said, I forgot to put it in the rundown, but it reminds me, I was talking to the State Department this week about the CIA director. But, I'm glad you remembered it because it was quite relevant.
Yeah, well, it becomes extra relevant when the CNN report came out later. So it was like, whatever, it's an interesting answer, but not sure what's going on here. But then when you pair it with the CNN clip, the CNN report, it's kind of interesting.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.